Welcome to Soulfire Wisdom with Kate Olson. As an evolving spirit and change adventure navigator, it is Kate's mission to empower and guide you on your path and inspire your truest passions. She will encourage you to share your gifts, speak your truth, and ignite your inner wisdom and purpose. She hopes to do so with a little humor and grace, and her own soulfire passion. Kate talks with amazing guests who have embraced the pursuit and are fanning the flames of their own passion, purpose, and soulfire wisdom. Now here's your host, Kate.
Good afternoon, or maybe I should say good morning. I'm not quite sure today, so I think I'll go with good day, like our guest might say. This is Kate Olson, and if this is your first time tuning in, I'm a hypnotherapist, an NLP practitioner, a Reiki master, and a life coach. And this is Soulfire Wisdom, and usually I say it's Thankful Thursday and tell you what I'm thankful for today, but this is a special broadcast that we're doing on a Saturday. However, I am thankful today as well. And so I'm going to tell you that I'm thankful that I had a really productive morning and I got 2 blogs done. And so that made my morning. So our show today is A Case for Optimism, and I'm interviewing Victor Perton all the way from Australia. And in Australia right now, it's 7 in the morning. So we made Victor get up really early. So hello, Victor. How are you?
Hi, Kate. A new lesson learned. Perhaps I shouldn't do a broadcast the morning after a birthday dinner on a Sunday morning, but it's such a joy to be with you. Your spirit is so infectiously optimistic and happy. It's a delight to be with you. So, g'day, everyone.
So I am going to start this off by asking Victor a question. Victor himself is known for asking people questions, but I'm going to ask him a question, and that is, Victor, what are you passionate about?
The spread of optimism. For me, the zeitgeist today is so pessimistic. Cynicism seems to be valued, certainly in the media and beyond. And my belief is that these times call for realistic and infectiously optimistic leadership. So I'm impassioned by that, and my daily ritual, like your writing and your spirituality and your coaching, for me, it's helping people unpick what makes them optimistic. So I spend my days asking people, what makes you optimistic? And when I asked you that question, Kate, of course, you told me that to really succeed in life, you need to look through the lens of optimism.
Yes. Yes, I'm not surprised by that answer. Victor actually asks people what makes them optimistic on a regular basis. He recently opened the first storefront, the Center for Optimism. And his purpose is to help everyone and anyone become more optimistic and to confidently declare that they are a realistic and infectiously optimistic leader. His beliefs are that the leader looks like the person in your mirror, and the times call for realistic and infectiously optimistic leaders. So Victor is the author of The Optimism, The How and Why, and The Case for Optimism, The Optimist Voices. He's the founder and editor of the Australian Leadership Project. And through or 2019, he has delivered keynote speeches and run many workshops on how to become more optimistic. Optimistic leadership, strategy, and innovation. He's given workshops in prisons, schools, universities, boardrooms, corporations, conferences, retreats from Madrid to India, Australia, New Zealand, and the USA, and virtually via video and social media. Victor's life experience includes stints as Commissioner to the Americas, 18 years as a parliamentarian, practice as a barrister, mediator, arbitrator, businessman, and board member. So, did we leave anything out in that bio, Victor?
It sounds a bit too busy, as I said to my friends yesterday. One of the things, my New Year's resolutions is to be less busy. But yeah, no, it's been a very blessed life. You know, when I think, as I say in my book, you know, 2 generations ago, my grandparents were one of my grandparents was executed in World War II. My grandmother was sent to the Gulag. My other 2 grandparents were refugees. And when you think of the chaos that they lived through, and then my own parents as stateless refugees coming to Australia, I've had this very blessed life to live through one of the most peaceful and prosperous times in history, and to live in a country that is so undeniably prosperous and peaceful. So I've had a fortunate life, so I've been able to experiment a lot without too much fear of what failure delivers.
So, what are some of the expressions of optimism that inspire you?
So the inspiration comes from asking people every day. It's the joyfulness. In fact, one of the authors who I asked recently said, just in asking the question, you lifted me up, Victor. So for me, I get uplifted whether I'm asking a woman digging a ditch in India, or whether I'm asking a prime minister or a president to unpick what makes them optimistic, because I'm very much a student of Gandhi, you know, and Gandhi's principal message was, you can't change anyone else, you can only change yourself. And it's one of the reasons I left politics. You know, I decided, you know, government is not the solution to these things, it's the individual. So one of my favorite quotes is from Professor G, a neuroscientist at the University of Melbourne, who said, optimism is the evidence of dreams not yet realized. And it's so evocative, it's so personal. Professor Erwin Lowe, who's the head of one of our largest health systems here, says you must be relentless in your optimism, and goes on to explain how Harvard, the American military, Mount Sinai Medical System, Oxford University, Melbourne University are proving, for instance, that the key to healthy and productive longevity is not your genetics, not your geography, it's your optimism. And indeed, there's a study out of Italy showing that people over 100 who remain active in their community, the 2 principal attributes are optimism and purpose. Dominic Barton, the head of McKinsey, said to me that every great leader he has met is infectiously optimistic. So, you know, not the rah-rah, you know, on the platform, giving the great speech, you should all be optimistic because I'm optimistic. It's that person who can unpick that in the team. And coincidentally, in the Australian Leadership Project, where I interviewed Jeremy Johnson, who's now the chair of the Australian Chamber of Commerce, spontaneously, he said that great leaders are infectiously optimistic. So, yeah, I've literally, as you know, Kate, I've now interviewed thousands of people on what makes them optimistic. And I reckon at least 50 to 60% of those inspire me, whether it's the woman digging the ditch who grins at me and says it's God, or, you know, whether it's the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea saying, you couldn't do this job unless you're an optimist.
Yes, definitely. And it's like one of the people that inspires me is Malala Yousafzai, or I think I said that wrong, but you know who I mean.
You got it very close. There's no problem.
For her,
my Australian accent, it sounded good.
Yes, for her to go through what she did at such a young age and to be so optimistic, you know, it's just inspiring. I mean, if she can do that, you know, we all can do it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I'm. We've actually had a great meeting this week of the advisory board of the Center for Optimism, and focusing on stories. So Disney, for instance, the CEO of Disney published his autobiography 2 weeks ago, and in his 10 principles of leadership, number one at the top was infectious optimism. And more interesting, strategically, Disney declared last year that people are yearning for stories of hope and optimism. And if there's one thing I'd love your viewers and listeners to take away, it's that necessity for them to share their stories of hope and optimism. To, in fact, and another piece of homework, you know, if they're inspired by yours and my conversation, is literally to have a bit of a think about what makes them optimistic, and then go around the corner and ask their partner or their husband or wife or their work colleague, what makes you optimistic? Because it's all action orientated. It's you know, as I say, the leader looks like the person in your mirror. And when I gave a speech to a group of students at Victoria University on Wednesday, and I said, well, you know, you ladies who use red lipstick, on your mirror today, write, the leader looks like the person in my mirror. And I said, and you gentlemen, if you don't use lipstick yourself, make sure you borrow it from a friend or a partner or your mother, and write it on your mirror too. Because what you and I emphasize, Kate, is optimism and action. So, you know, we know bad stuff happens. You know, people in our family will die. People will lose their jobs. The first innovation won't work. And it's persisting. And a good friend of mine, Jane Burns, a professor at Sydney University, but the former head of the Collaborative Research Centre on Young and Well, puts this beautifully. She says, people talk about resilience and everything else, but on the day when it's, I'd rather give up, but I need to keep going, optimism is the critical trait that will pull you through. So in these dark times, you know, when you're watching news or listening to the news, it seems that the world's falling apart. Each of us needs to be that lighthouse in the fog of pessimism.
Well, that action that you do of asking people what makes them optimistic, well, that process that they go through in thinking about it, even if they weren't particularly optimistic before, thinking about what makes them optimistic actually makes them more optimistic. I mean, that's
in fact, I asked Martin Seligman that question, Kate. Martin said, you've nailed the right question, Victor. And then I asked him, and if people want to have a look at my Twitter, it's just the handle, Victor Perton. At the top, I've got Martin Seligman, and Martin talks about, you know, how his life has got better, how his profession, the profession of psychology, has got better, and then how the world is manifestly better. And even, you know, a great and famous author like him, writing in optimism, positive psychology, and hope, was quite joyous in turning his mind to both thinking about the question and then answering it for us. And, you know, with your NLP and hypnotism and everything you do, you must see this almost every day in your coaching work as well, Kate.
Yes, definitely. And so that comes to my next question is, you've been doing a lot of work in the prisons. So what makes a prisoner optimistic? I mean, it isn't exactly the ideal, place to find optimistic people.
It's a very interesting environment. And if I summarize, prisoners are not that different to us. They're looking for some joy and meaning in their day. If they're going to be released soon, they're already looking forward to spending time with their family. But typically the prisoners in my sessions have been long-term prisoners. And I give them the same homework that we're giving your viewers, to ask friends and colleagues what makes you optimistic. And I had one of the most notorious gangland murderers come first to my first session and then to my second session. And the second session, he said, "I've done my homework, Vic." And he had interviewed someone quite prominent in Australian society and shared that answer. And I looked at him and I said, "But what about you?" And he looked around at the others and he said, "You just listen to Vic. You want to thrive in prison, or no, you want to survive in prison, you've got to be an optimist. You want to thrive when you get out because it's going to be hard to get a job, hard to get a business loan. You're going to have to persist. You're going to need to be an optimist." He said, "But if you bugger it up and you get back in here, you'd be an F-wit of the highest order." Now, I think he's going to be a professor of psychology if he doesn't go back to gangland after prison. But the other example that really struck me, or two other examples actually, they're both worth doing. One was a gang leader who said to the others, as we were talking about what makes you optimistic, he said, "I came to this session because people said it's really worthwhile and they like what Vic's doing." He said, "But he's reminding me because a few years ago I was dying of cancer. And my family came to visit me at the Peter MacCallum Cancer Hospital. There were about 100 people came over 2 days to say their goodbyes. And then he said, the surgeon, the night before the operation, said, 'Look, I'm going to give you the best surgery. You're going to have the best post-op. But the thing that will pull you through is your optimism.'" And the prisoner next to him with arms the size of your thighs, probably, or waist, Kate, a big man, he was just moved to tears. And then the other one that really moved me in the prison environment was another murderer, a young man, who'd killed someone in the heat of an argument. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the session, he was still a little sour. And I said, "Look, why did you come?" And he said, "Well, the guy in the cell next to me came to your last session and he's a changed man. He now keeps a gratitude journal. He meditates once a day and he reads me 1 page of your book every day." And he said, "If I came to your session, I'd give you, that Victor would give me a copy of your book." And so that just moved me. But again, the test of success was that, in fact, a colleague of mine, Sue Barrett, and I were asked a few weeks ago to, in fact, come and do the same session for prison management. So they'd seen such a change in the prisoners that they thought it was worthwhile, the management, learning the same lessons of infectiously optimistic leadership. And our minister or secretary for prisons said to me, what he liked about what I'm doing is I don't talk to the prisoners as if they're prisoners. The presentation I do to the prisoners is the same I would do for a corporate or a not-for-profit or a university or a school classroom. You talk to men and women, whether they're in prison or digging ditches, with the same respect. That's one of the principles of Australian leadership. We're one of the most egalitarian societies on earth. So it comes naturally to us to talk to anyone with respect and to ask that same question.
Well, yes, and I in both America and Australia, we actually started with people that were considered either criminals, outcasts, people that weren't really fitting into the society as it was. And they turned out to be, the pioneers of both of our countries. So
if you think about that, I mean, the Australian miracle is, yeah, we started out, the Aboriginal community that was here, was invaded by soldiers and convicts.
Mhm.
And we've built such an amazing society is a great tribute, because a lot of the other British colonies, Spanish colonies, Portuguese colonies are relatively poor countries with lots of corruption. We've managed to build a society with some of the best integrity systems and the like. And the United States, of course, you think of the Oregon Trail, that brought people to the West, this notion of taking a wagon across a continent. And, you think of what makes California is that optimism and that ability to experiment. But both of our countries are interestingly part of an experiment now where Steven Pinker, the psychologist from Harvard, has mapped the change in our media from 50-50 positive, negative in the 70s to gruelingly negative now, just gruelingly negative. And, with your expertise in brain plasticity and what this negativity does to the brain, it's damaging people. So in Australia, for instance, there are statistics that show that the diagnosed rate of anxiety and depression have doubled this century.
Yeah.
Not last century, since 2002. So something's going wrong in the happy-go-lucky country. You think of Crocodile Dundee and, call that a knife, the can-do man, the can-do woman. Now, most Australians still are. You give them a task, they'll say, she'll be right, mate. Leave me to do it. But there's an increasing group of people in our society who are becoming fragile and anxious. And whether it's the continuing messaging on climate or Trumpism or the like.
I think it's, that you can't rely, we've got so much access to information now with the social media, but you can't really rely on that information, and people are confused.
But it's not, the conventional media is trying to put the blame on social media, but in fact, most social media is very positive. You and I and most of our friends on Facebook or Instagram, LinkedIn, we're posting positive stuff. But most of the negativity is actually coming from the conventional news.
Well, no, if you look on social media, you can find as much negative as positive. And the conventional news as well. I don't know if you have in Australia. What we have here is you can turn to one channel and hear one thing, and turn to another channel and hear exactly the opposite. And in some areas of the country, you can hear one thing, and in the other area of the country, you hear something totally different. So I have relatives in the Midwest, and I'm in Seattle, and they have a whole different belief and perspective on what's going on in our country. And that, up until, I don't know, maybe it's been the last 10 years, there wasn't that big of a disparity. There was differences in, like, when I was a kid, my parents, there are two political parties in this country, are the Democrats and the Republicans, which you probably know. And my dad was a Republican and my mom was a Democrat. And they were both from North Dakota, but they had different backgrounds from their family. My dad's father owned his own business, and that's where the Republican came from. My mother was raised by a single mom who was raising 5 kids. So, the Democratic made more sense. And so I watched, they had different perspectives, but they could talk to each other. And in the end, they both wanted the same thing for the country. That's how the political parties kind of worked back then. They don't work that way anymore.
Mayor de Blasio of New York talked about the role of a very famous Australian in making that happen, and that's, of course, Rupert Murdoch, who owned or did own the Fox network. When I lived in San Francisco and I'd come home from the office, I would often watch The Daily Show, with that sort of left of centre humorous view. And then I'd balance it against one of the Fox commentators, and I figured I got somewhere in the middle. And yeah, it's very much a feature of American television now. You're such a big country, 330 million people, maybe 100, 200 different, community identities. Australia's slightly different because our population is 25 million, spread over a continent as big as America. So we don't have as many outlets, but you get that variation of, more positive towards the Liberal Party, more positive to the Labor Party. The Labor Party is more like the Democrats, the Liberal Party is more like the Republicans, but both are closer to the centre than American politics. But here it's this grinding negativity. Nikki Hutley, one of our most famous economists, was interviewed, I was on a panel during our last election campaign, and a fellow said, is there a difference between women and male economists in their attitudes? And she looked straight back at him and said, no, I can't see a difference between male and female economists. The distinction in Australia is between the optimists and the pessimists. So for me, it's that grinding pessimism that is our call to action. And one of our most famous historians, Geoffrey Blaney, often says, look, in a country like Australia, where the government has such a small percentage of production and a relatively small percentage of the economy, much smaller than in the US, why do we worry so much about what the Prime Minister's doing? Why do we worry so much about what the leader of the Labor Party is doing? Most of the leadership is out there in the community, whether it's the people running the kindergarten, the church, the small business like your father, or the large corporations like BHP and the like, who are leading mining around the world.
Yes, I don't have a lot of knowledge about politics in Australia, but I know here the introduction of the disinformation, I don't know really what to call it, the conspiracy theories and all of that have infiltrated our news media and social media and everything. I think that's a big instigator of negativity. I mean, it's intended to do that, and I think it's successful because I have thought about it. And, my feeling is, okay, if I believed all of that, I might have a hard time being positive too. The thing is, I don't believe it, but if I did, it would be difficult to, not be negative.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what the cause is. I mean, you look at Hong Kong, for instance, and for instance, the demonstrators who are throwing fire bombs at the police.
Mm-hmm.
Are they really, democratic campaigners, or are they provocateurs from the Chinese government? Look at what happened in Santiago in Chile. I mean, one of the most boring cities I've ever been to, very peaceful and quiet. And yet a small increase in bus fares triggered off riots, with people burning down buildings. Paris, you've just had this weekend, the transport workers over a pay dispute, again, smashing buildings and attacking police. So the conspiracy theories have some underlying. There are, for instance, we know that the Russians funded the right wing of French politics. You have to suspect They've done the same thing in other countries in Europe. We know the Chinese are certainly paying large amounts of money to people in influence across Africa and in our own patch for Australia in the Pacific Islands. You know, countries that have typically relied on Australia for guidance on development and governance are now getting big wads of cash from, you know, the communists in China. So
what's going on?
There is a reason to suspect that there are big movements going on to destabilize American politics and Australian politics. And I think there's enough evidence that's come out about what happened in the 2016 election and the role of WikiLeaks and others in the attack on Hillary Clinton to say some of the conspiracies are right.
Well, the conspiracies, no, some of the facts are right. The conspiracies are not right. By conspiracies, I mean, it's been proven by our, national security forces that did happen. It's not a conspiracy. The conspiracy theory is that it wasn't Russia, that it was the Ukraine. But, you know, if you think about it, if anybody thinks about it, people say, you know, how do we know? Who would know? Well, who has the motive? What would Ukraine's motive be to do that? It's to their disadvantage to do it because, you know, they previously have been supported by both parties in our government. And for them to do that, you know, would cause what happened recently, you know, of what Trump did about withholding their aid. So it just doesn't make sense that, and the corruption, most of the corruption in Ukraine is instigated by Russia. I mean, there is corruption in Ukraine, but Ukraine and Russia are, I mean, it's very infiltrated with Russian influence. And
yeah,
so,
well, I mean, you know, you had the Russians running the place for 70 years from,
yes.
And if you look, I mean, I've traveled extensively across the old Soviet Union. I mean, that is the Soviet legacy. You know, the only way you could survive in the Soviet Union was to operate on the black market. You know, there were shortages of meat, there were shortages of fish. You know, for the ordinary person just to get the basics of life, they had to be able to understand the black market. They had to deal with the black market and, you know, the unholy alliance between the Communist Party and organized crime is, you know, how you end up with these incredibly wealthy oligarchs, some falling into favor with Putin, some falling out of favor, people dying in mysterious circumstances. Even in Australia now, we've got quite a kerfuffle around the Chinese apparently backing certain political candidates. There was one of our senators had to resign over a bribery, not bribery allegation, a proven bribery. And that just hasn't been part of our shtick. But it brings us back to, Kate, that in these confusing times, you know, where there's all this information traveling around about conspiracies and negativity, that fog of pessimism requires action from each and every one of us. And you know,
definitely.
There's the two elements, as Disney would commend, you know, share your stories of hope and optimism. But the homework I'd really love each of your watchers and listeners to do is to go and ask someone close to them what makes them optimistic, and perhaps on your Facebook or mine or on LinkedIn, that they share those answers with us. That would be a fantastic Christmas present, New Year present, not to us, but to them and to their families.
Yes, definitely, I think. And I was just going to say before you did that, yeah, we were talking about politics, so we were getting a little bit off into that land of negativity. So what did inspire you to write your book, the second book, The Optimism, The How and Why?
Um, it came about, the first book came about after I'd given a speech at the Global Integrity Summit in 2017, and the change of atmosphere it caused, people said you should turn that speech into a book, and I did. And Helen Clark, the former New Zealand Prime Minister and then head of the United Nations Development Programme, endorsed it. And funnily enough, New Zealand then came back into the picture, because about 4 months later, I was giving a speech and a workshop to the International Entrepreneurs Gathering in Auckland. And the feedback afterwards was, we had a good time. You know, they loved the speech, and we all went off to dinner afterwards. But the written feedback was interesting, that Victor convinced us very quickly on the need for optimism. We want more of the how. So that created the new book, Optimism, The How and Why. So it's a series of personal experiments to ask people to change their greeting, to change their questions, to meditate as you recommend, to do yoga, to think, to read more humour, to share more humour, to surround yourself with optimists. And then the second half of the book is several hundred quotes from people on optimism and the reasons for optimism in the workplace, optimism and strategy, optimism and innovation. I even have a collection of optimism in eulogies, so that if people have to make a speech at a loved one's funeral, that there are some beautiful phrases they can use. And of course, I was talking to a nurse yesterday who works in the end of life period in a hospital. And we were actually talking about that incredible gift that some people have of spreading optimism from their deathbed. And in fact, I had a woman who shared her quote with me off her iPad just before she was to go in for serious surgery. As she said to me, if I die, I'd like my kids' last memory to be of me, the optimist, me, the positive.
Yes, I like that we have celebrations of life now instead of, well, not always instead of, but a lot of people do that rather than a funeral. And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, and it's that intergenerational optimism, you know, but Seligman and the scientists who work in optimism say only 25% of optimism is genetics and parental conditioning. Optimism is pretty much a personal decision. As the Dalai Lama says, you know, choose optimism, it feels better.
Yeah.
As the late Shimon Peres, Prime Minister of Israel, said, look, we all end up dead, but I choose to live as an optimist. It makes me better, makes my country better.
True. So optimism can be learned. What tips would you give people for learning to be optimistic?
So number one is to, in fact, read optimistic and positive materials. So working my way through it, don't start the day listening to the news. Do something else. And I love Martin Seligman's notion of the gratitude journal. So I often commend to people, you know, whether it's over dinner with their family or on their own, you know, with a bedside journal, to record that 1, 2, 3, maybe even 10 things that were good in the day. And first thing in the morning, instead of listening to the news, take that little journal. If you're sitting on the toilet or whatever in the morning and you want to read something, the first thing is read back what you wrote yesterday. One of my friends who'd had a very serious business bust up, she was cheated by a business partner, started a gratitude journal and recently published it as 149 Days of Gratitude. So if people want to see how that works for someone, Sue Barrett's 149 Days of Gratitude is a great thing. Meditation is really important. I've been, even my keynote speeches with 1,000 people, I will break after 15 minutes of speaking myself and do a 3 or 4 minute meditation with an audience. So meditation is very, very powerful. The best meditation is the Buddhist compassion meditation, but Christian prayer, Muslim prayer, Sikh prayer are all great ways of doing that. Then I commend to people change of language. So in Australian greetings, we typically say, hello, how are you? And the same greeting is there in French, in Chinese and others. In Australia, people typically answer not bad or not too bad. So it's a double negative. And as I said to the students at university the other day, it's a wasted question and a wasted answer. So I suggest to people, try for a week, and they get a refund on their half hour listening to you and me, if they just try it for 1 week. So instead, when you say hello to someone, say something like, what's the best thing happening in your day? Or what's the best thing you've had today? And I guarantee you they will look at you with some amazement. And they might be able to answer it, they might not, but it turns them to the positive. And then in your case, if someone says, hello, how are you? Instead of doing the quick, great, fantastic, or if people answer, not too bad, just try and pause 5 seconds. Just say, thanks for asking. Oh, I've just watched this really interesting podcast with Kate Olsen, or I've had a beautiful breakfast with my kids, or I just had a great business meeting. Nothing too long, because you want them to ask the second question. And then, of course, humor. I mean, laughter is such an important thing. I have a cousin who is a psychologist, and I think she's booked out 3 months in advance because her nickname is the happy psychologist. She makes sure that all of her patients leave. So there's a number of those hints. People can have a look at my book on Amazon. There's sample chapters and get some idea of some of those hints. But it's this, I think the best way is to answer that question themselves today when they're finished watching us, is to ask, what makes me optimistic? And then to go and ask husband, wife, children. I've had a lot of people take it up in the workplace. They'll have an executive meeting now once a quarter. They'll put it on the notice paper, so you don't want to catch people by surprise, but go around the table and ask, what makes you optimistic? And Christmas is coming. 2020 is coming. So people are going to have lots of big gatherings with turkey and wine and all sorts of things. It's a great way of starting a conversation around the table.
Yes, I want to add 3 suggestions. One is the first thing I listen to in the morning is music. I love music and it always brightens my day. But before that, before I ever get out of bed in the morning, I make it a point to smile. And sometimes, when I first wake up, I'll be, oh no, I wanted to be awake 10 minutes earlier, or, I'm really in a hurry. Whatever I'm thinking. But then when I stop and I smile, all those thoughts just go out of my head. And I, automatically am thinking more positively.
I have a morning music list, Kate, which includes Farrell's Be Happy.
Yes,
so
and I like
Farrell's Be Happy. I love August Green's Be Optimistic. They're both great pieces of music.
Is going to be This Is the Best Day of My Life. It's by the American authors.
Yeah.
So, I love listening to music, and starting my day that way is always, good. If for some reason I can't, it's just I've missed something. But the other thing is mindfulness. And that is, if you catch yourself worrying, say, is this happening right now? And if it isn't, don't worry about it. Be present in the moment and enjoy that moment. I mean,
Sister Shivani, I don't know if you've ever heard her. She's the Brahma Kumari speaker, commands huge audiences in the United States and India and elsewhere. She says she meditates in the morning to prepare her for an all-day meditation. That there's no wasted thought. And your point, Kate, on smiling, I mean, the evidence around, when you walk down the street, just saying hello to strangers and smiling, beautiful. And it doesn't need to be anything profound, just beautiful day or good morning or whatever. It lifts you, it lifts the other person. And, the modern society with all of this, bad news that, the person approaching you might be a mugger or the like. You see people not making the eye contact they might have made 20 or 30 years ago. And, everyone who goes past, even on city streets, I say good morning or good afternoon or beautiful day. And of course, some people look at me as some sort of weirdo, but I still feel good doing it.
And neuroscience also supports that smiling, because even if, you're not doing it intentionally, like they've had models, they'll have them hold a pencil in their mouth to make them smile. And even though, it's a forced, forced thing, that, having the corners of their mouth rise in the form of a smile actually changes their brain.
Yeah.
So
no, there's lots of evidence around that. And I mean, it's coming from politics, you just say, fake it till you make it. Smiling will lift you, just as you say. If you smile, someone will smile back at you. And it's this, and there's a lot of evidence now around even the hormonal transfers. If you're with someone, the chemical ones, and even in a video conference like this, where you feel present, you still get some of those benefits. But of course, the greatest benefit is being present with someone. And that's why I always say choose optimists for your coffee companions and your dinner companions, because you can hire pessimists by the hour from law firms and accounting firms. And that just, and even touch, when you put your hand on top of someone else's hand, that transfer of positive energy. And well, you're one of the global experts in this, Kate. I mean, you know more about this than anyone. So, what are your hints?
I'm learning. I'm definitely not an expert, but the more I learn, the more impressed I am with this, whole field, just like you said, fake it till you make it. Well, actually, you're not faking it, because when you go through the actions of acting like you're happy, you actually become happy. So
spot on.
Yes. So you just opened your Center for Optimism. So how is that going, and what do you hope to achieve?
Yeah, the Center for Optimism was originally an online vehicle. So it's only 12 weeks old, so it's not some ancient institution. And it came from a conversation where someone had asked me for some help, and I'd made a suggestion, and this sort of throwaway line that said, what could we do that Victor Perton himself can't do globally? So I immediately set it up, and we've got a fantastic advisory board, which includes Robert Masters, Eloise Grace, Sue Barrett, John Hagel from down the coast from you in San Francisco, James Strock from Phoenix. So we've built an international board very quickly, and we've got literally more than 100,000 followers online. But I kept thinking, I'm flying everywhere. As you said in your opening, this year I've been to India, to Taiwan, to New Zealand, to the United States. And, whilst 7 or 8 years ago, I would have said it just feels natural, I now know what it does to your body to travel so much. So I thought, rather than go and do all this stuff in other people's boardrooms and other people's prisons, why don't we just experiment with a shop? So I think it is the world's first shop of optimism, or optimism store. And so what we're doing is just inviting people in to share their optimism. We're doing little round tables. Some of the big corporate events I've done, one of the requests has been, would you do a family and friends event? Our teenagers need to hear this message. So it's in smaller groups. So we've got a board table that takes, 8 to 10 people comfortably. So we're doing little round tables, we're doing Taste of Optimism, we're doing meditations. So it's an experiment, Kate. It's still not clear where we will end up, but I thought, I'm an optimist and I believe in innovation. Let's give it a go and see what other people make of it when we make it open and available to people. So it's in a lovely leafy little suburb. The parking's easy. It's close to the central business district. It's a lot of fun. It's orange. People already tell me that they love the vibe. As you create your vibe. So if you've got a shop that is only about optimism, it quickly has a vibe there that attracts people. So it's a lot of fun, and we'll see how it goes through the summer. I'm going to keep it open between Christmas and New Year and into the new year. So when people need that little dose of inspiration, maybe they're a bit down, maybe they're a bit lonely, that they can come in and we can dose them up on what they need to be an infectiously optimistic leader in 2020 and beyond.
Okay, so you've done a lot of traveling. Have you ever been to Seattle?
I love Seattle. It's one of my favorite cities. I just love catching the ferry across. And I have a good friend who studied with me in China in the 1980s who lives there. And it is one of those great cities of global innovation. When you think, Microsoft, Amazon, Costco, to name just a few. And then the lifestyle. It's changed since I first went there. When I first went there, it was still a bit of a lumber town, and it was quite different in temperament to what it is now. But yes, I've even driven when Tesla was brand new, I did my first test drive in a Tesla through Seattle, which is quite dangerous, really, because a quiet car in Seattle, your pedestrians are so ill-disciplined, Kate, that you're always thinking you're going to knock someone over. You've got to have a noisy car in Seattle.
Yes.
And I love the coffee at the market and the Pike's Fish Store and throwing the fish across famously. So no, I love the feel of Seattle. And in fact, I used to enjoy occasionally just doing the drive from San Francisco to Seattle and or catch the train. It's just lovely.
San Francisco is another really great city. So
well, I lived just near the ferry building, so I had the benefit of catching a ferry to anywhere I wanted to go.
Yeah. So I have one last question, and that is, if you could leave the listeners with one takeaway from today's show, what would you want that to be?
To celebrate the brilliance of Kate Olsen, and to wish her a happy Christmas and a happy New Year and success beyond. But number two, just try these two experiments. Take a lipstick and write on your mirror at home, "The leader looks like the person in my mirror." And secondly, to ask yourself and your friends and family, what makes you optimistic? So the two sentences I'd love them to remember from our wonderful, warm conversation: the leader looks like the person in my mirror. And the question to ask of everyone is, what makes you optimistic?
Okay, great. I think that's wonderful advice, and I hope everyone will give that a try. And so, Victor, can you tell the listeners how they could get in touch with you if they wanted to?
Yeah, so look, my name is just Victor, Victor, Perton, Perton. You can go to Kate's website and there's lots of links there, or just Google me and you'll find my own website. It should connect to the Center for Optimism. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm not a big user of Instagram, but I'd love people just to connect up, share what makes them optimistic, or ask me any questions indeed. So yeah, and over this Christmas, New Year, I'll be on duty. So if people have got those difficult questions about being optimistic and how to be optimistic in a negative environment, or how to be optimistic when they've got a a naysayer at their executive table. These are important things. And of course, one of the best things they can do is to stay listening to you, Kate.
Okay, I want to remind the listeners of two things. One is the radio website is soulfireradio.com. And to find Victor's info, you click on guests and scroll down to his photo, and then you can find the information to connect. And if you're looking for his website, Center for Optimism, remember that center is spelled C-E-N-T-R-E.
So I'll have to do a little link from the other spelling, and we'll make sure that it doesn't matter whether you're an American speller or an Australian speller.
Yeah, you should do that, just because, yeah, it's hard for people to remember that little difference.
Great suggestion, Kate.
So we thank you all for listening. I think this has been a really important show. And as I said, I hope everyone follows does Victor's homework. And we have another great show planned for next week. That is staying in alignment to avoid burnout and more with Dr. Faith Brown. And so tune in next Thursday at 1 p.m. and find out how to stay aligned and avoid burnout. And I'll tell you that Dr. Faith is also an expert in the area of relationships. So she'll be sharing some info about all kinds of different relationships. And now at this time of year, when we're getting together with family, I think that's really important to know. So thank you for listening today, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you for listening to Soul Fire Wisdom with Kate Olson. We hope you enjoyed the show. If we made you laugh, brightened your day, or sparked a new thought, we have succeeded in our mission. Join us next time. Share more secrets and truths, and all the magic of transformation that is the journey to Soul Fire Wisdom. Always remember, be fierce in the pursuit of what sets your soul on fire.